Rate of Fries series brought to you by Keys to the Shop. And today we are talking about the Bellwether Roaster with Arno Holschuh. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rate of Fries. This is a series from Keys to the Shop, a monthly series that focuses on having elevated conversations on roasting. Now, this series is brought to you by Roast Magazine. Roast Magazine is one of the world's longest running and most respected trade journals. They curate and publish content from all over the coffee roasting industry, all over the world, from subject matter experts, professionals, scientists, and the content is there to equip you with what you need to succeed as a roaster. Not only that, in their magazine, Roast Magazine, they also publish a lot of books, including books like Green Coffee, Cheap Coffee, The Book of Roast, and more. So go to roastmagazine.com and check them out and subscribe today. If you are a roaster, you want to get really great at your craft, and you want to be a part of the global community and have the best ideas just a click away, then you need to be subscribed to Roast Magazine. Check them out online over at roastmagazine.com. Now, today we are going to be talking about equipment. We are going to be talking about the much talked about Bellwether Coffee Roaster, the all-electric coffee roaster that is seeking to change the face of roasting as we know it. And I think this is a great opportunity. This particular series is a great place to actually have this conversation. And today I'm going to be talking with the Chief Coffee Officer at Bellwether Coffee, Arno Holschuh. And like I said, Bellwether is seeking to really change the game of roasting with what they say is the world's lowest carbon coffee roaster. Arno, our guest today, is a veteran of the industry for sure. He was one of the first employees actually at Blue Bottle and went on to manage their coffee operations and their products. And for the past 8 years, he has been working with Bellwether to build a really delicious, profitable, and sustainable future for coffee roasters, farmers, and coffee drinkers. And so on this episode, it's a bit of a longer one because I've got a lot of questions, as I'm sure you do, regarding a machine that is making waves in the coffee industry. We talk about the future of coffee roasting and traditional versus these innovative new technologies like the Bellwether Coffee Roaster. And we talk about the benefits of roasting your own coffee and some of this kind of people that are usually looking up the Bellwether Roaster to use it in their cafes. And this could be you. And essentially, this conversation is going to be a little back and forth where I hope that the questions that I'm asking here are answering questions that you might have about a roaster, making really big claims in the industry, trying to do good by the planet and support coffee farmers, support coffee roasters in the process. Yeah, I'm excited because I thought that it was a really great conversation, and I hope that you benefit greatly from this and you leave more informed about this roaster and where we stand as a community. And maybe you'll have more clarity on how you wish to proceed as a participant in this industry. So without anything else from me, let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with the Chief Coffee Officer at Bellwether Coffee, Arno Holschuh. All right, Arno, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm on a trip to Honduras right now, and it's a beautiful day outside, and there are very literally macaws flying around and chirping in the trees, so I'm doing very well indeed.
Love it. You're making me a little jealous. Maybe I'll turn on the sound of macaws in my office later today. Thank you for joining me on the show. I have wanted to kind of talk about Bellwether and its place in the roasting community for a little bit now. And so I'm glad for the opportunity to have this conversation. I guess I want to, start, briefly, talking a little bit about your own context in coffee. I know you came up through Blue Bottle. You've got an extensive history with that. Like, how did you go through in coffee and then get hooked up with Bellwether?
It is a classic story, and one of the nicest things about coffee at that time was the ability to have a real Horatio Alger experience where you would start as a barista and then end up in a position with more reach and sort of a more career track position. And so, yeah, I started as a barista at Blue Bottle. I was their fifth employee and one of their first baristas at their very first brick and mortar location. As that company grew, the company culture was very focused on internal promotion and development of internal staff resources. And so, when we needed a green buyer, I got to do that for a bit. When we needed roasters, I roasted then for a little while. I founded the technical service department there and really got to do a lot of fascinating stuff in coffee. Ended up making the leap to production management and then sort of managing the product and operations for coffee, right? I would always say at a company like Blue Bottle was the easier half of the company because the retail operations were so much more complicated, right? But it was a great privilege. I got to manage the product from farm to cafe or farm to e-commerce fulfillment. And at that time, we were still doing wholesale, and so farm to wholesale.
Okay, so you did everything. I mean, like you said, this is a classic example of somebody climbing up through different opportunities and experiencing kind of a panoramic, of the coffee industry as it was available to you. And then getting to do, with Bellwether, it's a new technology. It's something that you contrast what you've done in coffee in that classic path to a not very classic role in that the machine itself is new to the market and that kind of thing. What was that transition like in representing something that was newer after having gone through a lot of traditional paths?
You've asked the exact correct question. Like after 10 years at Blue Bottle, and it was a wonderful 10 years, I really, really treasure my time there, sort of was standing on the outside of traditional, very successful third wave coffee company and looking in, and I was like, that was wonderful. And yet, like, I found myself also a discontent in some ways because especially in my later years there, and by the way, this is a problem that I think was the acknowledgement of this problem was shared with other members of the leadership team there and with the founder. We were sort of like, all of the roasters were dudes who had taught each other to roast, and the retail managers were kind of stuck where they were in some way. And I felt like there was not the same, how can I put this? At that time, there was not the same social mobility that I had experienced. And even more critically for me, there was this core issue of burning natural gas, to be frank, right? Like at that time, you were starting to see the real crisis with coffee leaf rust with Roya. Farmers were very clearly messaging to us that they were in dire straits. They were losing entire crops. It was destroying livelihoods. It was, as somebody said to me yesterday, it changed the GDP of countries. Roya it is a big deal, but at that time it was incredible. And it began to be clear that was connected to climate change, right? And yet to do our job, we had to go over to the roaster and open up the gas valve and, ignite the flame. There was not a viable alternative. And I began to think about these questions of access to economic opportunity and what we were doing to our own support systems a lot, right? Especially about the climate change thing, it's sort of like the old cartoon image where there's somebody who's like on a branch of a tree and sawing off the branch. It's like, we were doing ourselves damage and it hadn't really hit home yet for us. There's still plenty of good coffee, cheap, right? But we are dependent upon coffee farmers as coffee roasters, right? And we weren't really acting as if we were. I guess I've kind of muddled the two streams, but like those were the two things that I was thinking about. And the founder of Bellwether, Ricardo, came to me as I was having such deep thoughts. And he said, I've got this great idea for a cafe roaster that will be electric and won't generate any smoke. I told him that that was a very silly idea and that it would never work. I think that probably like people who are listening may have had this thought as well. It's like, you're going to get smoke taint on the coffee. It seems technologically impossible. It's too far a leap, right? I encouraged him to do things that were less ambitious. He ignored me and proved me wrong, for which I'm very grateful to him. As I began to see the technological feasibility of a recirculating roaster that would clean the roasting gas, if you will, right? Like the smoke, as it went, I began to understand just how powerful this could be, right? Because it does a couple of things. Like if you can run on electricity, you're obviously going to be producing less greenhouse gases dependent upon energy mix. But if you can recirculate it, it's also going to be much more efficient because you're no longer generating heat energy just to jettison it out of a chimney. You're now taking that heat energy and you're plumbing it back in to the inlet. And so that saves a lot of energy. It made it much more thrifty, and it made it possible for anyone to put in without build out. And having been through a couple roastery build outs of Blue Bottle, I knew just how expensive that was. Just how forbidding that was, right? Like we had started Blue Bottle, or James Freeman, the founder, started Blue Bottle on a little 5 kilo in a little shed. And he kind of like, I think he started it on his credit card, right? But I was standing and looking at the industry at that time, and I was like, these days to build a roastery, you need like $500,000, right? And if you want to build a roastery of scale, you need many, many more dollars than that. We have inadvertently and unintentionally erected barriers to access to roasting as an economic activity, right? Roasting is a really awesome economic activity. You can turn something that you can buy for, let's say, depending upon the quality of coffee, like $2 to $5 a pound, and turn it into something that is worth, in whole bean form, at least $20 a pound in most cases, right? It's very powerful, but the price of entry had gotten very high. So yeah, so that was kind of the start of it for me, this concept of like, we could use this technology to address what I would have called some of the inconsistencies in it. You know, Chris, I want to hasten to say that I do not believe that there is like an evil person trying to like make it harder to get into coffee roasting, or there's an evil person out there who's trying to heat the globe with, you know, natural gas roasting. I really do think that without better technological solutions, there wasn't much of an alternative. So yeah, I just like I tend to think that people are, I don't know, blameless might not be the right word, but like nobody's trying to do the wrong thing here. And it's up to companies like ours to provide a pathway through technology so that people can live in concert with their values and the reality that they're seeing around them. Sorry, I'm long-winded, Chris.
No, that's good. There's a lot to discuss. I appreciate that overview of things and the history of it. And, you know, because my initial thought is like, what's the problem that Bellwether is trying to solve? And you answered it very well. And just as you mentioned, I think there's the idea that there's no like evil person in the corner with a white cat saying, you know, just keep that gas burning, you know, or whatever.
Right.
And it's just as true, I think, that life is about trade-offs. You know, in trade, there's, not to use the word again, but yeah, you know, it's about trade-offs. Is there's no perfect solutions. There's no silver bullet, if you will. And I don't think Bellwether's claiming to be like the silver bullet that's going to save the industry from, you know, things. There's trade-offs for everything. And there's the idea of product market fit too. Like there's always going to be roasters who want to go the traditional path of roasting. And there's methods that you can use to use your energy very efficiently in those systems. And this is one of the things that I wanted to ask about Bellwether, especially, is that while there's this carbon solution in the technology, there's also a lot of conversation around the energy use of the machine for the amount of output. And I think it's 6 to 7 pounds per batch in a Bellwether at this moment, if I'm correct. So I wonder if you could speak to the scalability of Bellwether, those who want to use it. And I know many, many people who use it. I've even had a past client that's using it currently, versus the energy use that it takes to produce the volume of coffee that a traditional gas roaster would.
I think you've asked a couple of really interesting questions. I'll take the energy thing first, right? If you think about energy in terms of, you know, in like a truly like a physics sense, like kilocalories or joules or something like that, right? The roaster is actually amazingly thrifty per batch. You know, it pulls about 9 kilowatts and turns 3 batches an hour. And if you were to translate the amount of energy that you are releasing by burning all that natural gas into kilowatts, you know, or kilocalories, if you made that comparison, we would come out ahead every time, primarily due to the fact that we are a recirculating roaster And that recirculation allows you to insulate your roaster very well, right? But I think if you're talking about energy in terms of human energy, right, like it has a small batch size. One little tangent. In terms of energy cost per pound, the energy cost per pound is pretty negligible, right? The roaster pulls a little bit more than a 3-group espresso machine. It's not actually that exotic, the amount of power that it pulls, right? And we don't think much about having the espresso machine on all day. But people are, I think, are a little bit trepidatious about the Bellwether. And I'm just here to say, like, yeah, it's new, it's different, but if you're making hundreds of lattes a day on a 3-group, then this amount of energy consumption through electricity is something you're already in. You're already in this game. If you take your espresso machine and your hot water tower or your brewer together, that's how much the Bellwether pulls. There's more than the Bellwether pulls, right? But in terms of like, let's talk about the batch size thing, because I think that's really the core, right? And the answer is a little bit complicated. There's a traditional path to success in coffee roasting. And it's the one that we took a Blue Bottle. We started on a Diedrich IR5 and worked our way up to a UG22. Then we got a Probat 75, right? And then we started on the Loring platform, right? And you kind of like, you add capacity, you often are increasing the format of your roaster, you're increasing the batch size of your roaster to achieve economies of scale. It's a very tried and true path. Incidentally, it's super fun to roast on open flame drum roasters, right? But it is not the only path, I guess is what I would say. We firmly believe that, like, if you're a coffee company that has, let's say, 10 retail units, right? We've done these calculations a lot. Like, we really feel quite confident about this. You would economically in just as good of a place if you chucked your large format open flame roaster out, sold it probably, and started putting Bellwethers at the point of retail, because you no longer need your hub and spoke roastery, right? The problem there is that I'm a very nostalgic person, so I understand this, but the problem is to some degree nostalgia, that like traditional roastery, they are incredibly great places to work. I found, at any rate, right? It's very fulfilling to roast coffee. It's very fulfilling to work with your hands in that scenario, and having so many people who are so focused on that product in the same space is a very beautiful thing, right? Sort of socially. And I don't deny it, right? But we have to kind of come to grips with this idea of like, is that going to be the dominant concern, right? And I would give you an example from like another world, right? Like from automobiles, right? I've owned a 1981 Toyota 4-wheel drive pickup truck for 20 years. I love it. I work on it myself. It's taken me everywhere, right? It definitely burns gas. Sits up on a higher suspension with big off-road tires. It burns a fair amount of gas, right? I can't not love it, right? But my wife and I recognized that that was not really how we should be doing the majority of our vehicle miles. And so we did buy an electric car last year. And so like, you know, having the old and the traditional with us is so comforting in an age that is like very alienating sometimes. Like our lives are changing so quickly around us. But I think that finding an appropriate place where we are not being self-destructive in our use of nostalgia is kind of like a big job for our culture.
Let me ask you two questions in one here, but one is, in terms of traditional gas roasting, it sounds like what you're saying is there's no responsible way to do it. And anyone who is doing it is, whether they're not being evil, but you're right. And so we're getting that off the table with like the idea that you're doing gas in general. Is there a place for gas roasting responsibly in an economy concerned with sustainability?
I think that in the fullness of time, no, there's not, right? I think that like not as a primary means of production, let's say that, right? Like I'll give you another example from my life. Another kind of like I'm such a corny guy, Chris. Like I like steam locomotives, and if I have the opportunity to ride on a coal-fired trained, I do it. And because I think it's cool. I think it's fun to have like a really tactile experience of what it was like in the past. But that is not how I would travel from coast to coast, right? So is there a place for gas roasting in the future? Yes, but not as how we get our jobs done. I think, on the other hand, the transition is something that I think is very different, right? Like, people have invested their fortunes in gas-fired roasting plants, and there is no reasonable way to demand of them that they throw all that money away right away. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the question of transition is different. But if you're asking me, do I think that it's responsible to roast with natural gas, all things being equal? Should we be doing it in 15 years? I mean, no, we shouldn't be. It is unfortunate that this thing, which has so much beauty and is so much fun, is part of an industrial system that is going to cause us such incredible damage, right? And it is already, really, right? I think I'm just one of those people. I think that climate change is the moral challenge of our age, that we need to greet it. We need to step up to it. And that I kind of approach it with like, it can be quite sad to think about the things that we might lose, but I also get very excited when I think about the fact that we can do this, And again, like, I say this because I too have experienced this. Like, it's easy to look at the immensity of the problem and think like, well, I don't really matter. Like, my little solution doesn't really matter. And how are we going to do it anyway? And I just need to like go through my life. But my message is that, like, you know what, like, especially here in the US, like, it was part of our national narrative about ourselves for a long time, the idea of an American can-do spirit, right? And I kind of think we need to remember that, like, we are builders. We can do things, right? And as a world, we can do this. We can meet the challenge of climate change and save our future.
Fair enough. And I like what you're saying about, in we covered sustainability in general on the show, the idea of being a small person in a small business and making a big difference has always been on the table. Like, you can make a big difference just by, the aggregation of marginal gains in general.
Yes.
How industries are formed, we do want quick fix solutions. We want those silver bullets. We want to say, like, man, we got here over decades and hundreds of years, and now we're just going to, like, next 5 years, boom, we're going to fix it. It's not going to happen. And back to the idea of the trade-offs, it's similar in that, I mean, you've got an entire industry that's based on a very traditional way of doing things, and there's a variety of different solutions, for instance, in sustainable certifications, let's say.
Yes.
To demonize one of them as a way of affirming the other. And so, like, a lot of people would just have a lot of fun just saying, like, fair trade, ha, we're not going to do that. And back in the early 2000s, I was like one of those people because it felt like super, like, countercultural and fun to do.
Yeah, no comment. I can't remember. I choose not to recall if I ever uttered such a phrase.
And none of us has ever talked bad about Starbucks and, whatever. So the point is that, there's this family of people that we have this can-do spirit who are creating solutions for people who want to opt into that system and say, this is what's of value to me. And just like any system that seeks to innovate to find a solution, there's going to be not only a revelation of your effectiveness, but also a revelation of a new problem. So the new problem in this case might be the idea of, you want to dismantle a structure, slow as it may be. There is also the production of the actual machine to replace the sheer girth and volume of the industry.
Yes.
So that's what flies into my mind, and I think in a lot of other people's minds, is saying, okay, yeah, Bellwether is one electric roaster, and there's other electric roasters out there. However, there's also the need to manufacture a lot of these machines and the parts and the energy, again, back to the energy. So that feels like the next point of focus to say, well, now that you take gas off the table, for example, now what about the manufacturing and the natural resources that are required to manufacture the actual thing itself, where one spoken hub roaster can outfit an entire fleet of coffee shops, etc. You know what I mean? Like, That's where my mind goes, and I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. We have not yet done a materiality assessment of the construction of our roaster. That's actually on our to-do list in the near future, right? It's quite complicated to do, as you can imagine, and we're scrappy, man. Like we're not a behemoth. It takes a lot of focus for us to get to something like a materiality assessment, but we do think about it. And of course, yeah, steel, the roaster is primarily constructed out of like the bits of it that are the roasting bits are constructed out of cast stainless steel, cast and machined stainless steel. And steel is carbon intensive. Yes. Green steel is something that I think the steel industry is trying to figure out right now. And we're not the steel
Right.
industry, right? We have to use the solution that is here today. I think another thing that Bellwether thinks about a lot, though, is like, as you're saying, like we're also consumers, right, as a company, and how can we use our buying dollars to extend our reach, right? And I think that on questions of machine construction, we lack the knowledge to know what the correct thing is to do so far, but stay tuned. On the question of does it still make sense, again, without hard data, I don't want to pretend I have hard data when I don't, but the implication is strong that yes, it does, because like the difference in carbon from a pound of coffee roasted on a Bellwether versus like a traditional roaster it's about a pound per pound roasted, right? And if you look at the global industry, I think that we're at like 24 billion pounds annually or something right now. That's 24 billion pounds of carbon. And roasters tend to be quite long-lived devices, right? Like, I mean, the UG22 that I roasted on was an original UG22 from like the 60s, right? So we're building a durable appliance. Again, like our construction is cast steel. That's very durable. That's, we don't think that our core hot path, as we would call it, should ever decay or somehow become obsolete. So the savings will accrue over time. There's obviously the same debate is happening with electric cars, right? And just yesterday, somebody came up to me and said, that Teslas are actually more carbon intensive. I was like, I don't know that. And I have actually seen the numbers there, because obviously with electric vehicles, there's so much attention that many people run those numbers. And, for the current kind of electric vehicles that are out there, the Bolts or the EV6s or the Teslas, they recoup their, any carbon tax that you accrued during construction, they recoup it within a year, and then that vehicle is going to be driving for another 10 years, right? And with electric vehicles, perhaps longer, because they're simply much simpler. They're probably going to last a lot longer. And I think that analysis holds true for us as well, right? Like if you have a roaster for 10 years, one of our roasters. The other thing is that like those traditional open flame drum roasters, they took a lot of carbon to build too. Like when you look at our roaster, it is not just a roaster. It's a little bit more like a roasting plant, because it also has exhaust handling in it, right? So you would need to compare the carbon impact of constructing your roaster, installing your roaster, and then building your exhaust system and the afterburner too, right? And I don't necessarily know that per pound we would be any worse off there. But also, Chris, like again, I try to be really real, and we have not done that materiality assessment.
Sure. You mentioned the Tesla and the everything else, the one, just as an aside maybe, but because I know that you plug in and you're not using a battery necessarily, but the slavery around lithium mining and that kind of thing that people kind of point to downstream and saying, like, we're saving a lot on carbon, but passing down the dysfunction of the production and the high demand of those things in places like the DRC and in Africa and the places where we get our materials, like the very thing that Apple, et cetera, is like held to a long time to account for. And so I think there's this also idea of what is the social impact of that? Although with your roaster, like it's not battery operated. So
it's not battery operated.
Yeah.
And I think most of the childhood slavery concerns are actually about cobalt, and they're not to be taken lightly. And I mean, lithium can be damaging to extract, but they're also trying to figure out how to get it out of the salton sea or reclaim batteries right now. And I tend to think a technical solution is forthcoming. But I think most people are going to switch to, sorry, this is very nerdy. You may want to edit this out, Chris. They're going to switch to like lithium iron phosphate batteries. that no longer require cobalt. The technology is now viable and is beginning to be deployed. And it's just way cheaper too, right? So batteries have been problematic, and I think batteries will always be problematic in some sense, right? Like, because they don't retain their performance forever, they're consumable, right? Like, but yeah, to your point, we don't use batteries. We plug into the grid. I mean, I think James Hoffman just plugged our roaster into a battery, connected some
the solar
panels. Yeah, that was an interesting demonstration, and we were really keen to do that because, like, we still get people who simply don't believe that it works. They're like, nah, you're faking it, right? Or it can't roast good coffee. James has been a friend of ours for a long time, and when he proposed this thing, again, like, I'm such a naysayer, I was like, that sounds hilarious, and it's not gonna, like, I was like, I wonder if that's gonna work. But it actually worked really well. So we were excited about that, yeah.
So all of you desert outdoor roasters out there,
Yes, I know. I had somebody ask me, I was like, do you really think that this is the way that roasting needs to happen? I was like, I don't think that driving to the Palm Desert and setting up a solar array and a battery is a sane way to produce coffee. But if it was, that would be like a really cool place to go visit and camp.
Yeah.
Like
once the sea levels rise,
like, roaster mines of Joshua Tree or whatever. Yeah.
Sure.
No, but we plug into the grid, and I think I want to, like, this is another question we get a lot, which is like, you plug into the grid, but they're burning natural gas to make that electricity. And so we've looked at that as well. And we say that we save 87% on carbon compared to a traditional roaster. And that is using the average American energy mix. The number is much rosier if you are in California, where we've deployed a lot of renewables, or in places that have a lot of hydro as well. But actually, even if you're in Wyoming, which is a big coal-producing state, and coal is like the livelihood, the backbone of people's livelihoods there, and they just burn coal, you are still better off from a carbon point of view, because the roaster is simply more thrifty with how it uses energy. So you're better off burning coal to make electricity to roast on a Bellwether than burning natural gas to roast coffee.
Well, there you go. So in the future, expect some Bellwether powered by coal.
No. I think that, like, for us, it's very liberating, that fact, right? Because we think that we think that electric roasting is better technology, right? We think that our roaster is the best technology, in that we're not really here to have some of the other, like, as a company, we're not really here to have some of these other arguments, right? We definitely have customers who are very into coal, if I can be frank.
Oh, sure.
And that's, we're like, you want to use the roaster, it's the right thing to do. The coffee's going to be great. Have at, and in a time, like, as everybody's always saying, and it's true, we're very, very deeply riven and divided as a country, right? But we have no interest in, like, making that worse or picking a side, really. We are trying to present a technological solution that applies to everyone, and that is a better solution for everyone.
Well, let me ask this, and then I want to touch on the market a little bit as in the later half of this conversation here. But I do want to ask the question, because I know that the Bellwether is being adopted by a lot of coffee shops, quite popular, and over the past years, it's provided a solution for many. Right now, I mean, who is it not for?
Oh, that's a really good question, Chris. I think that, again, in the long run, we don't think that there's anybody that shouldn't be roasting on a Bellwether. We reserve the right to over time to improve our product and make that case more strongly. But I think that if, we're humans, and we're very pro-human around here. And if you have invested in your roasting plant, we understand that it may be challenging for you today. And we don't judge people for paying rent, if I can, like, be very blunt.
Sure.
Yeah, my dad is German. I mean, he's American. He would always say he's proudly American, but he was born and raised in Germany and came across in 1958. And I ended up learning German and like, kind of going back and hanging out with the family there and everything. And there's this great expression in German that I think about all the time. Is erst kommt das Brot und dann die Moral. And it means first you need bread and then you have morals.
Oh.
And I think that it's really true that, like, it is not a reasonable expectation for people to be focused on broader moral questions when their own economic livelihood is not secure. Like if you're not food secure, you're going to eat that which is edible, right? And we shouldn't judge people for that, right? We need to be aware of the fact that, and we think about this a lot with farmers too. I think that's mostly where we think about this stuff. Like we need to find a way to give people access to economic opportunities as part of our sustainability plans. And so you ask, like, who is it not for? If you just bought a 15 kilo gas-fired roaster, then we get it, right? You're going to need to come up with a way to transition out of the capital expenditure you just made, right? Now, we're here to help, right? Like if you're curious, come talk to us, right? But again, even for that person, they should be roasting in a Bellwether too. But we're realists and we understand that it can't happen for everyone immediately.
Let's transition to the idea of the people who are buying the Bellwether, and the main selling point here also, beyond this conversation of wanting to go electric, is that you can roast your own coffee without the build out. And a lot of people seem to just be thrilled with it, right? So I wonder if you could just give us a little insight into the kind of, like, when customers are adopting the Bellwether in their stores, what's the traditional story that people will have from opened our shop, we wanted to start roasting our own coffee, we used a Bellwether, and here we are. What does that typical story look like?
There are kind of two typical stories, and then there's a third story that I just want to say. The first typical story is that people have a successful and established business, and they have been purchasing their coffee from a roaster retailer, a wholesaler, right? And they have this sort of dawning realization that is not doing everything for them that they want. So if they were buying from wholesaler X, they're likely getting a weekly delivery. And so whether they think they should be serving their espresso on day 3 or day 10, it's actually impossible for them to do because they only get one delivery a week. So like when they first start using that freshly arrived coffee, it's probably going to be a little bit too fresh. And by the time that they're through with it, it's going to be a little bit aged out, right? They're paying a bit of a quality tax there. They probably have maybe 10 SKUs to choose from, right? Maybe, often 5, right? Sometimes the roaster retailer just tells them what they're going to get, And so they are lacking autonomy and flexibility in the ability to focus on their own quality, right? These are like the big things. Many of them who are very heads up about their businesses also understand that they are missing out on the opportunity to build their own brand equity because they're serving somebody else's product. And those people come to us and they say, like, I have these problems, right? You asked about product market fit. Product thinking is really like, what is the job you need to be done? And the jobs that they need done are, I want higher quality coffee. I want a more secure supply where I can make roasted coffee anytime I want. I want to have more power over what that coffee product is. And I want to be building my own business by building my own brand, right? And we solve all those problems for them. And so, yeah, they get a Bellwether and they're off to the races, right? And we do generally hear that we're solving those problems for customers. The second story, which is related, is somebody who is starting a business. They want to start a cafe, they want to start a roastery. And for them, I think that they've never really like run a cafe where they are purchasing their coffee from a wholesaler, so they're not really aware of what the pain points might be. But they intuitively sense that they want to be the captain of their own boat. For those people, it is really the question of autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Many of those first-time entrepreneurs, many of the people that I think about as having benefited from your show are people who have not yet started their first coffee business that they themselves will run. And they may have a job that's paying the rent. It may pay them handsomely, but they want to do something where they call the shots, right? Where if they make a mistake, they're the one that's going to have to pay. And that, like, if they make a beautiful choice, they're the ones that reap the reward. I think that is so strong in humans, and something that is so beautiful about us, the entrepreneurial zeal, right, is really about, like, I can do this and I want to do this. And so that we solve that problem for them. They could solve that problem by getting a traditional roaster and putting it in their cafe, but they'll find that is a more complicated path. right, and a more expensive path. The third path I just wanted to talk about really quickly was that during the pandemic, we actually saw an uptick in business during the pandemic because when people who were using somebody else's coffee lost the ability to sell lattes over a counter, they realized that what they had actually been selling was like a retail experience. It was a brewing, they were selling a brewing process and a retail experience. And they could no longer sell those things, and they had nothing left to sell. And for them, it became clear really quickly that if they wanted to survive, they needed a product that they could sell that was theirs. And they came to us because with a Bellwether, it can be, we've seen it in as little as I think 5 days from contact to install, right? If we've got one in stock and you're close and we can make it happen, for most people, it may be a month or something like that. But you can be roasting, like if you're motivated, you can be roasting in 2 weeks. People needed that speed. And I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to help businesses survive. I think that probably everybody who's listening to your podcast is really loves cafes and saw what happened during the pandemic as a tragedy. And to be able to help some people keep their businesses afloat and then help them thrive is something that I'm going to be able to carry with me for the rest of my life. It's something I'm so glad we were able to do. So proud of.
Surely. Yes, indeed. The question that comes to mind in your first example is the idea that everyone should be using a Bellwether and that, basically everybody who's roasting at least. Now, the problem of having this delivery timing of coffee from your wholesale provider for a lot of people who want to roast their own coffee and do what you're saying is the idea that they can supply wholesale coffee to clients, which perpetuates the same quote unquote problem. So it doesn't sound like what you're saying, or are you saying everyone who wants to roast their own coffee has the dream of I should be a roaster, but not everybody should be a roaster. You have to have customers as wholesale clients to make your investment into this equipment, which is still expensive, to make it worth your while, because most people are going to not be able to, or maybe they just want to supply their shop, but they also have an online store. They want to supply wholesale clients with their roasted coffee, which brings about that profitability. So what's the balance there when we're talking about that whole scenario?
I mean, I think the point that you raise is a good point, which is that as they become wholesale roaster retailers, they then will be doing weekly deliveries to their clients.
Right.
And, I guess it sounds kind of glib, but in one way, we're sort of that's their business. We're here to support. And in fact, we provide training to our clients about how to stand up a wholesale program. But if their clients are willing to accept a weekly delivery, even though they were not, that's kind of not
Sure.
That's not a problem that we're going to solve for them, right? We want them to thrive. We want our customers to thrive. I do also think, I would just kind of put this out there, the days of being able to stand up a roastery and then immediately get all the wholesale accounts in town, it's a very competitive market now. And I think e-commerce is, for many of our customers, is a more important part of the solution. But again, we have customers who are very healthy wholesalers too, right?
Yeah.
I think that one way of thinking about this is that again, let's say that you're a larger company. Let's say you have 100 retail units and they're sprinkled all throughout the US, right? Well, if that's our model, then you actually have 100 production facilities. And so the time to get your coffee to that end consumer is going to be shorter. The distance will be less. The carbon taxes, the carbon usage is going to be less, right? Versus if you had one central facility on a coast, and then we're trying to transport that roasted coffee to all of your markets, right? And I think that one answer to what you're asking is that we do believe in distributed manufacturing, right? We believe that you should be, for coffee at any rate, that you should be buying from a local roaster, even if it's a national brand.
Yeah, I especially agree with that point, the idea that buying local, if you're really concerned about the energy use and emissions and things like that, then if you're a multi-roaster flying things in from Denmark and that's, or other countries, in fact, and
yeah,
that it can be problematic. Now, it is a great industry, and there's a lot of different players that we can go back in time and say, well, let's examine the path you left. But what we can't do is examine the impact in the future that it would have positively on the market as a balance to that investment. So the idea that multi-roaster shops and craftcoffee.com and trade.com expose so many people to different varieties of coffee in aggregate, again, might mean a better future, albeit in a currently, presently expensive one in more ways than just financially with energy, et cetera. So we don't have the benefit of foresight as much to see the impact of these things. So I get where you're coming from, and it makes me think about just the downstream impact in sourcing green coffee. And that's
Ah,
something that I wanted to talk about too. Yeah, like, people will order coffee from you. So it would be
they
helpful
do.
to, know a little bit about that model, but also one of the mantras, and it happens to be something that I believe in as well, is the idea that I want to buy more coffee from less farmers. And that way, you know
Mm,
what I mean? Like, there's so many of us in coffee, sustainable relationships in mass create consistent demand that allows people to actually not take two steps forward and one step back. So with a distributed model like this, at first glance, it makes me think, okay, there's a lot of individual users who, by rights, are not necessarily trained roasters. They're relying on the equipment to do the roasting. They're buying very small amounts of green coffee all over the place. How does this play with that?
I agree that you should be in a long-term, meaningful relationship with your coffee farmers, you know? And I understand what you're saying. Like if the market becomes so fractured, then that could run counter to that. A little bit about how the whole green coffee thing, and for that matter, the roast profile thing, works with Bellwether. If you choose, we will sell you green coffee, and that green coffee will come with roast profiles pre-programmed, right? If you choose to make your own roast profiles, you can absolutely do that, and many of our customers do. If you choose to buy your own green coffee from outside the marketplace, you can do that as well, right? So there is no sanction against going your own way. We compete for your dollar by trying to put a better product forward. That's really all it is. Because I think that's also something that has been a bit of a misconception about us, like that we're like a walled garden. It's not the case, right? We really want to invite people into our garden party and they can leave anytime they'd like. So to this question though about like, because most people do buy their coffee from us, whether or not they're buying using our stock profiles, they end up buying the coffee from us. And so we are able to aggregate that demand. We carry over 20, I think currently is maybe 23 different products in our green coffee marketplace world. It's a very well curated selection. Our green buyer, Gabriel Boscana, is an amazing hero and just does wonderful work for us. And so our customers can choose from 20 different coffees. They can try, they can have a rotating single origin espresso every 2 weeks if they wanted to all year long. And it's not problematic in the way that you suggest, because for us, we're aggregating all that demand. We're buying by the container load through ever better established, ever more supportive relationships with
Okay.
farmers. And I think for us, farmer outcome has been like a really big deal. I guess that was the unspoken third thing that I was really kind of vexed by as I stood outside Blue Bottle and I looked in. Again, not Blue Bottle's fault, but like obviously a lot of people have generated a lot of wealth in the United States through coffee. The coffee farmers have not been brought along for the ride. And so we developed a program here where we would be able to assess what the requirements of the coffee farm were as a business unit, and what it would take to pay the farmer a living income. And our living income pricing program has been really, really successful. We currently have it in our Colombian coffee and our Guatemalan coffee. We think it'll be over our entire supply chain within 2 years. The way we got there, it was really complicated. It's not a simple thing to figure out. But I'm here at this like coffee convention, Let's Talk Coffee, which is great. And those two co-ops are here. For them, it's real. Like for them, they had entertained many roasters on their farms, but they had never had a roaster who came down and said, "Let's get down to brass tacks. What do you actually need?"
Mm.
We do try to be best in class there, right? Like we try to not just have a relationship that's predictable for them over time and be partners over time. We're trying to actually like structurally change the way that coffee is priced. and price it more on a bilateral relationship where they are giving us what we need, coffees at prices that we can then pass it on to our customers and they can make money. And we are giving them what they need, which is a price that is appropriate for their growing conditions, their cost of production, their yield, the cost of living in their area. And so, yeah, if people are curious about it, you can read a lot more about it on our website, but we care a lot about it. And we've tried very hard to put our money where our mouth is.
Awesome. I want to end here because I feel like we could go on a lot longer, but I have sort of a final question. And it's appropriately at the end of the supply chain where the coffee, the Bellwether, is roasted by the individual who, let's just use the extreme example of somebody who said, hey, I want a Bellwether. And you said, okay, great. Here's one, 5 days, or you're roasting coffee in 2 weeks, right? Now they're relying on the machine. They're relying on the presets that you've given them because they have not learned how to roast coffee. The machine does the roasting for them. They roast their own coffee, but they themselves, in the traditional sense, aren't necessarily roasters. Now, I know there's roasters who are trained roasters who also buy Bellwether. However, getting up and going in 2 weeks and being able to fairly represent the coffee itself on the machine to the customers in this, like you mentioned, the competitive market, you've got these roasteries that have invested a lot into and are very nimble because of their expertise to create varying degrees of changes to their roast based on their cuppings, based on their skills and their history, their institutional wisdom. If you're going this route, you're starting from zero in a lot of cases. How does quality control shake out in terms of we're serving a coffee where we stopped using our wholesale provider that has all these institutional wisdom and the roasts, et cetera. Now we're going to roast our own. For anyone roasting their own, there's always a learning curve. So how does that learning curve work in this process where learning is kind of the thing that you're maybe they tried to avoid?
Ha! I was like, ooh, what's Chris going to say? This will be fun. No, we do not want people to not learn. That is not the point. It's not an easy bake oven. It's not a locked box. Let me just tackle that question of quality assurance first. So the roaster, because it's a recirculating roaster and because it's really well insulated and because it's very precision built, it is able to replicate its roast profiles with an amazing degree of fidelity, right? And we're constantly tracking that, right? Making sure that remains the case. That's one of the major tests that they do at the end of the manufacturing line is they run it through its paces and make sure, is this thing hitting its marks in the Agtron scale for these different tests, right? And it doesn't get to leave the factory unless that's the case. So if anybody thinks there's anything untoward about their coffee, they can always send us a sample back and we'll run it through our QA lab. We have a great coffee team, including a great QA function here. We'll Agtron that sample, we'll cup it out on the table. And if it is not correct, because, it's a machine, things can go wrong, right? It has happened that a heater coil will snap and then that heater is not producing the same amount of heat as it should. Then we can see that right away, right? Incidentally, we can often see it just based upon the data streams we get out of the roaster. We have the ability to pre-diagnose most malfunctions on the roaster before a technician goes by looking at data signatures that come out of it. But we want to be the coffee team for our customers.
Right. You are, in some sense, the wholesale provider of the roasted coffee because you're setting the machine is you and the standards of we want this Guatemala to taste this way. And they're saying, yes, you do it. You are blessed to do so. And we will trust your judgment because they ultimately rely on your palate the same way as I would rely on my wholesale provider to say, we've crafted this blend and you equally have crafted this software to do with the coffee what you want it to do.
Yes, and I mean, the thing is that if it is not we have these 4 profiles that come out, and we are definitely experimenting with maybe expanding that a little bit. We're thinking about that maybe later this year, but it comes with 4 profiles now. If those don't meet your needs, then you can reach out to us, right? And one of 2 things will happen. What generally happens then, we say, if you're buying from us, if you're within our program, then we know the coffee that you're roasting really well, and we can work with you remotely to support you in making a roast profile that better suits your needs, right? It often doesn't even take that long. People will express to us, I want something that is, they may not even know the technical terms, but they might be saying I want it to taste less bright, or I want it to have more body, or I want something that's simply darker, but not as dark as the next step up in darkness, or whatever. And the team can work with them It works for us because that's a one-time event where we're going to help that customer get to the product that they need for their business, and that is the product that they love, right? And then once we've set that profile, it's going to run correctly for the entire length of that crop year, right? And so it's a worthwhile investment for us. And yeah, I think we run a QA function. We support individuality in our customers if they want it, you know? I think what we have seen is something that I maybe had suspected, but a lot of our customers, they get into the business and they think that they're going to spend all day thinking about roasting. But once they actually open up their shop, they spend all day thinking about scheduling baristas and ordering milk. And if you want your business to thrive, you have to be flexible enough to do the things for your business that it needs done. And again, sort of not be too tied to your romantic preconceptions of what running a coffee business is going to be like. You know, I really encourage people to always be curious and always be adaptable, because that's what this business takes. For a lot of our customers, they start using the profiles. I mean, keep in mind, it's like 20 coffees with 4 roast profiles each. You know, it's 22 right now, excuse me. So it's 88 different products that you can get from our marketplace. And then you can customize to an infinite number of products, right? Like, you can really build your own coffee program out of that marketplace that is unique to you. And then they once they have something that satisfies that job, they move on to thinking about how they're going to flourish as a business. And they look to their P&L, you know. We're very happy to be able to provide that service to those people. There are other people who are using it, you know, and they're doing all of the stuff themselves. And again, we love them too. That's great too.
Right. We've talked about a lot. I appreciate you taking time there in the morning in Honduras. It sounds like everyone's kind of waking up to your
Yeah.
end. So again, Arno, I appreciate your candor and your time. And speaking of curiosity, which we always encourage, if people are curious about the Bellwether and learning more, how can we get in touch and how can we do that?
Just head straight over to the website, bellwethercoffee.com. You'll find information about the roaster there. You'll find information about the green coffee product. We've just started a little trial where we might sell a little bit of roasted coffee as well. So if you're curious to try us out, you can go find a way to sell you a little bit of roasted coffee so you can see what we're all about. Yeah, just head on over to the website. We cannot wait to talk to you.
Arno, great talking to you. Again, I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I really hope that you enjoyed that conversation. And like I said, want to make sure that, you know, when we're considering these things, we're considering the big picture. And the word of the day here, of course, is curiosity. Examining things yourself to see, is this right for me, from all different angles? Because, you know, it wouldn't be good, whether you're buying a Bellwether or a traditional gas roaster, to just buy it flippantly. You should buy something like this with eyes wide open, and any kind of large scale piece of equipment that is, so that you can see, hey, this is something that we're going to really use for quite a long time. And we know the trade-offs, the benefits. We are fully on board, or we're not fully on board, but being fully informed is part of the process, right? And so it's really interesting what they're doing. It's definitely been helping a lot of people. And I really appreciate Arno's heart and the company's heart for doing good by the coffee industry, by the farmers. And again, we want to make sure that our collective efforts and all the solutions we bring to bear are all trying to push coffee forward. And as far as I can see, it takes a family, a variety of different approaches to try to solve issues as they come up in the industry. So I'm thankful for groups like Bellwether bringing solutions to bear, and others that will do the same. So thank you again to our guest today, Arno Holschuh. Now, if you want more information about Bellwether, and this is something that really piques your interest, then you should go and visit bellwethercoffee.com. You can learn all you need to know about the machine right there. And I would encourage you to talk to other people who use this equipment too. That goes for everyone. You know, I see so many people. Of course, you're going to talk to someone from the company And this is a real conversation with Arno, and I really appreciate his candor. And at the same time, just your due diligence, talk to people. Talk to people if you're going to buy an espresso machine or, large pieces of equipment. Talk to the people that are using it, reach out. And I think that's a good practice as well. So again, check them out over at bellwethercoffee.com to learn more. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback about today's episode, go ahead and email me. Chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can do that. I have a select episode links to past episodes related to this topic today. So if you go into the show notes for today's episode, then I would encourage you to continue down that list, and I think that would really benefit you to continue these thoughts and maybe add more clarity to the picture. And so thank you very much, everybody, for joining me on this Rate of Rise episode. It was really fun to do this. It's always fun to have you along. And as always, I hope this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.